Hello, friends. Welcome to Monk Chat. Tonight, I am here. I'm Maya Soma, first of all, and I'm here with Bante Sudazo to my right and Venerable Dangdai to my left. And welcome to all our friends. Geeta, Suzanne, good to see you again. Long time no see. Hello to Nancy. Hello to Michael. And how's our friend Jens and Nadine? Good to see you all. So whenever you're ready, feel free to type in the questions in the live chat, and we'll try our best to answer them. So we can start with Michael, who asks, recently Tricycle published an interview with the Dalai Lama on social action and righteous anger. I understand there is no righteousness in anger from a Buddhist perspective. We don't need anger to act for social justice. For example, it's been suggested that righteous anger is sometimes a mistranslation of Pali. Dosa is not always the word. Please talk about anger in this context from a Buddhist perspective. So any of the two venerables want to volunteer?
Sure.
All right.
Good points, and it's good to bring this up. So no anger. No indignation, but clear comprehension. Alertness, the same faculties that you cultivate in mindfulness. Right speech that's timely, speech that's not divisive, and you use your wisdom to shed light on the situation. Now, it could be perceived as righteous indignation, and it could sting people, but if it's the truth, and if it's beneficial, and if it's timely, then it is samma vacha, right speech.
Great, thank you. And would you like to add something else?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what he said, and also just to add to that one of the problems here that I've come to realize in this conversation is that people sometimes use the word anger in a broader sense than we use it in Buddhism. So people sometimes use anger to refer to conscience, in the sense of you recognize that something was inappropriate and you have a strong sense that it was completely unacceptable. So that strong sense of the inappropriateness of an action sometimes gets lumped under the word anger. And in Buddhism, it's actually quite appropriate. If you recognize that something is unwholesome, then you have a very strong sense this is not proper. This is not the way things should be. But we would not call that anger. That's just the functioning of conscience, of hiri-ottappa, your innate ability to know right from wrong. And then that can form the basis for doing wholesome actions, for doing something to try to bring compassionate benefit to the people involved, but without anger involved. So I haven't read the article, the Dalai Lama article that you're mentioning, but yeah, definitely anger has no place in Buddhism because you don't need anger in order to know right from wrong. And you don't need anger in order to act for what's right.
Great, thank you, Venerables. And I'll just add to that, actually, the words of Venerable, Her Holiness Kandro Rinpoche, who says that anger is at best a waste of time and at worst extremely harmful for ourselves. And that when we get into the context of social justice or issues of that sort, we tend to think that anger is connected, with our critical thinking. But what we're trying to do is preserve the critical thinking part and toss the anger. And so understanding that something is wrong is wholesome. So we keep that, but we let go of the unwholesome, which is an obstruction to actually making compassionate actions. And Geeta asks, to me, Ayasoma, I have a question for you. We have a Mahayana Bhikkhuni monastery near our home, and they prepare vegetarian lunch daily. The preparations are done by the bhikkhunis and lay volunteers. Is this okay with the Vinaya rules for the monastic order? Well, I will specify that I'm not ordained in the Mahayana tradition, so you should ask them directly. But what I will say from my knowledge and from my understanding of the Vinaya, there is actually no rule that forbids bhikkhunis from cooking. So it has to be done. There are a few ways through which it's being done. The only way that it's actually forbidden or that we shouldn't be doing it, that there's a precept against cooking, is cooking for lay people in a context that it's outside the monastery. So for example, if tomorrow I go and I start cooking in a restaurant, well, that would be breaking the precept. But there is actually particular exceptions or particular rules that make sure that, for example, if I go and visit my parents and they're taking care for me, actually, according to Vinaya, I can cook for them, even though they are lay people. Technically, they're not ordained. Or if I'm in a monastery setting, I can cook because I'm cooking for the larger community. So that's what I'll share. But for the particular bhikkhunis that you're talking about, you should ask them directly.
I'd also just add to that also with the bhikkhu rules, it's not necessarily a strict prohibition, but there are different ways of applying the rules around cooking, and those rules get applied and interpreted in different ways in different monasteries. So while it's a common practice in many monasteries that the monastics don't cook, it's not necessarily a Vinaya requirement.
Thank you, Bhante. And Gita also asks, are the bhikkhuni rules outdated in our current times? Well, I would answer with a question back to you. Why aren't you asking, are the bhikkhu rules outdated in our current times? That, kind of gives us a little bit more context and more information, that answer on why we're asking that question to begin with. So personally, I don't think they're outdated. I find a lot of benefit in actually practicing them. And I think my fellow monastics as well, otherwise they wouldn't be rogues, we would be lay people. So it's ultimately a question that should be asked if we have the intention to go forward, we find this helpful, useful. And if the answer is no, then there's no reason to put robes on. And Danilo says, hello, I already have questions. That's great. And hello to Jessie and Melinda. So Danilo asks, recently I found out that I have problems with metta. I have no close male friends nor teachers, so I find that I cannot properly do metta. For now, I will do general metta, but there must have been other Buddhists in history who have only female friends and female family while being male. Mahasi Sayadaw mainly spoke of focusing on your teacher or father, but I don't have, I guess, that. What should I do?
So first off, why do you think the gender of the person makes any difference? Nowhere in the suttas does the Buddha ever say that you should only do metta practice while thinking of people of a particular gender. Nowhere. So there's a number of common teachings about metta practice, which I don't know where they come from because they're not in the suttas. But you hear them repeated over and over again as though they were the Buddha's own words. So you hear people say things like, when doing metta, you should think of a particular person, but that person should not be of the gender that you're attracted to. It should not be your romantic partner. It should not be this. It should not be that. None of that advice comes from the Buddha. The Buddha said you should have metta for everyone, all sentient beings. The Buddha doesn't say, have metta, but only for women. Have metta, but only for men. Have metta, but only for people that you're not attracted to. Have metta for everyone except your boyfriend. Have metta for everyone except your husband. The Buddha doesn't say these things. That would just be ridiculous. The Buddha says, have metta for everyone, with no exceptions, no limits, no boundaries, no restrictions. That's what the Buddha says. So it doesn't really matter what gender your friends are. If you have a friend who, when you think of them, it helps you produce metta, then that's a valid way to start off your metta practice. So whatever advice you've been going on so far, it's clearly not helping you, and it's clearly not from the Buddha, so you can safely throw it away. Okay.
Thank you, Bante. And Michael had a follow-up question saying, can we say if free of ill will, right speech is there? Venerable Dangdai?
Ill will?
If free of ill will, right speech is there.
If free of ill will. Could be, yeah. That's for the most part. Well, it could be free of divisive stuff. More so. More or less.
Yeah, I mean, though, if you recall what Brother Diamond said earlier in the monk chat, being free of ill will was only one component that he mentioned. So, of course, freedom from ill will is important. But the Buddha also said it should be beneficial, it should be at the right time, and so on. So freedom from ill will is important, but you can go around saying quite destructive, harmful, inappropriate, untimely, wasteful, useless things and do it all without a mind of ill will, but that would not be right speech. That would all be in the category of wrong speech.
Right, especially if it's divisive. That's why I said maybe, more so than subtle. That's why you have to examine your speech. What you say may be truthful, but divisive. When you want to unify people, especially in this dire age we're living in.
Yeah, so for right speech to be right speech, there has to be wisdom in operation. The wisdom to know what's helpful and what's harmful.
Thank you, Venerables. And Nadine asks, doesn't the precept against taking life and practicing non-harm necessarily mean that in order to observe sila, one ought to be vegan?
How about you answer some questions too?
I did. I answered all the bhikkhuni questions.
Quick, I was just going to put this out here. The last time I checked, Buddha Shakyamuni wasn't vegetarian, wasn't vegan. He ate what was offered because he created a field of marriage with the lay support of the householders at his time. And they all weren't vegetarian, even though Indian society was and is largely vegetarian, and many are moving towards veganism. In fact, Devadatta wanted to make the Sangha vegetarian, but the Buddha said no. Oh, the Enlightened One said no. Why would he do that? Wisdom, supreme wisdom that surpasses our short-sighted wisdom and knowledge, our biases and so on. So remember, when we ask questions, we're asking questions with a biased mind, a short-sighted mind. Whereas the awakened one didn't have those limitations. Hence, he was Samma Sambuddho, completely awakened. So remember that.
Yeah, so to answer your question, I would actually say that there are two different answers depending on whether you're a monastic or a lay person. If you're a monastic, then the answer is no, you're not obligated to be vegan. The monastic practice, as Venerable Dangdai was saying, the monastic practice is to receive whatever's offered with gratitude and appreciation for the donors. And the Buddha says that for a monastic to receive a spontaneous offering of meat is an entirely blameless act. There is no bad karma. There's no harm caused by accepting the faithful, kind, spontaneous offering of a layperson. But that we're not allowed to receive meat if we suspect the animal was killed specifically for us. So for example, if somebody has a chicken farm and they see the monks coming and they're like, hang on, I'll go chop off some heads and bring you some fresh chicken, then we would have to say, no, do not kill those sentient beings for us. And this has happened in monasteries. Sometimes fishermen have come and said, I'll go and catch fish for the monastery. And we had to tell them, no, that's not appropriate. Do not kill for us. Do not kill for us. But if somebody just shows up at the monastery with a tray of fish, then we receive it with gratitude and appreciation. We may not eat it. Many monks, even in the Theravada tradition, many monks practice vegetarianism as a personal practice. But we will receive it, whether we plan to eat it or not. And sometimes that's all you get. And then what are you going to do? What are you going to do? On the other hand, as a layperson, when you're going out and buying meat from a supermarket, that's a completely different situation, because then you are actively supporting the animal torture industry. You're actively supporting the animal holocaust industry. That is karmically problematic. So if you're a layperson, yeah, be vegetarian. If you're a layperson, yeah, see if you can pull off veganism. But that's a different story than being a monastic. It's not the same situation at all. Those are my thoughts on the matter.
Follow-up question.
Sure.
Would you say that for lay people wanting to donate to monastics and monasteries, that for the greatest amount of merit, for the greatest good, that they would donate vegan food even if the monastery says we're vegetarian, so that they don't harm the animals as well as serving monastics?
It's interesting. So one of our residents is asking, basically, shouldn't lay people then donate vegetarian or vegan food to the monastery? And first off, I would say it's interesting that the Buddha did not make those specifications anywhere in the suttas. So we're getting into the domain of speculation. I would say ultimately it comes down to the motivation of the lay offer, the motivation of the donor. Some people, they just have whatever food they have and they want to share some with the monastery, and that's very wholesome. There's nothing unwholesome there. And other people, they're thinking in the terms that you're talking about. They're thinking about the fact that they themselves are committed to vegetarianism or veganism for good ethical reasons. So then naturally they're going to donate such things to the monastery. Yeah, of course that's wholesome. Of course that's beneficial. But it's notable, the Buddha did not put that restriction. He said, if you have something to give, then give it. If you have something to offer, then offer it. He doesn't anywhere say that you should only give a certain kind of food.
Yeah, I think it's also the Buddha didn't put those restrictions. Also because, up until 50 years ago, the food preference was food. So everywhere in the world, there was not really the luxury that we have these days to have this abundance of choices, which then allow us also to, be more in control of our diet and make more wholesome choices and less harmful choices. So in a place like Tibet, for example, up until the industrialization of food, there was no option for people to subsist or to be alive without actually relying on animal products. So there's that. So there's lots of different implications, I think. But I would encourage everyone to focus rather than on a diet on harm reduction. So wherever we are at, to reduce the suffering as much as we can, the impact that we have on the suffering of all beings. So if someone eats meat 3 times a day, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, perhaps maybe start by eating once a day. If you eat it once a day, then maybe eat it once a week and start reducing. If you're already eating less meat, then perhaps try and get rid of meat altogether and be vegetarian. And then from vegetarian, veganism, but also understanding where are we getting also all of these things from. How are they impacting the environment at large and all the different sentient beings? So always like trying to do bettering ourselves, and having the aspiration to harm less and less. But if we think that we're going to go overnight, it's kind of like practicing the removal of greed, hatred, and delusion. We all are practicing with that intention, but there's still greed, hatred, and delusion. We're still, obsessed with so many things in samsara. So perhaps we have a noble aspiration, like the one to be vegan, but we're eating, meat 3 times a day. It will be very difficult overnight to do that. So then we tend to think either I eat meat 3 times a day or I'm vegan. Well, I can't be vegan, so I'll just keep on doing whatever I'm doing. But instead, I think it's more skillful to aspire to do always, how can I better myself, and congratulate oneself in, like, for example, you're vegan for 1 day, you're like, wow, 1 day of compassion. That's incredible. 1 day in which I really committed not to harm sentient beings. That's 1 more day than, before, where there was 0 days. And then you increase 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, always bettering ourselves. And hello, Venerable Vimalanyani. Good to see you. And Adine says, I recently read that both the Abhidhamma and the Vinaya were composed centuries after the Buddha's death. If that's so, why should they be deemed canonical? Well, this is a question for Bhante Siddhanta.
Yes.
Well, briefly speaking, there is very good reason to not consider the Abhidhamma canonical. If by canonical you mean the words of the Buddha, then yeah, the Abhidhamma almost certainly was not the words of the Buddha. In fact, there's many different versions of the Abhidhamma which are radically different from each other, which also indicates that it's not the words of the Buddha. So yeah, I regard the Abhidhamma as being commentaries. There's sometimes some interesting material in there, but it doesn't have the same weight as the suttas. The Vinaya is a little more complicated because the Vinaya seems to have layers of material, some of which probably is very old, coming from the time of the Buddha, and then some material which was probably added later. And scholars far more proficient than I have done work on trying to figure out what's older and what's newer. And that's perfectly fine if that's what you want to do. But ultimately, the real important question is to ask, how does the Vinaya help our practice? One of the best quotes I've ever heard in my monastic life was from a monk named Bhante Dhammaloka. And he simply said, Vinaya is meant to support your Dhamma practice. If the way you're holding Vinaya is not supporting your Dhamma practice, then you're not using it correctly. This was a radical statement for me. This really transformed the way I was thinking about Vinaya. Before that, I was thinking about Vinaya as being this arbitrary list of rules that you had to follow. And that's not a very useful way of thinking about it. But Bhante Dhammaloka changed the way I was seeing it. I was like, oh, of course, Vinaya is meant to support your Dhamma practice. Why wouldn't that be what it's for? And yeah, that does mean on rare occasion, you're going to find things in the Vinaya where if you apply it strictly and without wisdom, then of course it's going to be obstructive to Dhamma. But interestingly enough, whether it's older or newer, the majority of the material in the Vinaya is very much in line with Dhamma and very helpful in cultivating wholesome mind states. Are there some things in there which smell a little fishy? Yeah, there are. But the vast majority of it smells like Dhamma. The vast majority of it's really helpful stuff. So I'm pretty skeptical about the Abhidhamma. It's definitely secondary literature. The Vinaya, it's somewhere in between. There's a lot of good stuff in there and a little bit of garbage, but a lot of good stuff. And I really value the good stuff. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Bhante. And Jesse asks, When I'm upset, do I rest in mindful awareness of my feelings of upset, or do I try to dislodge this unwholesome state of mind? Venerable
Kaya
Danda?
Sama.
No, I just gave a talk on this.
Okay, we go right to the feeling. So you know, right to the feeling. So whatever you put your mindfulness, where on exactly what's arising, as it arises, watch it as it persists, and then as it disappears. And that's exactly what happens. As you pay attention, you'll see this process. It's impermanent. Don't suppress it because it'll just show up again and there'll be an explosion and it won't be nice. And then you'll condemn yourself and say, I'm a weak practitioner or I don't have skill, when that's not the case. When already you clearly have the ability to see it. So continue to do that. That is it. It's simple but difficult. And that's the paradox. It's like, well, how can that be the solution? Yet it is the solution, but you have to familiarize yourself with this process until it becomes effortless, automatic, clear comprehension, alertness, feeling arose, anger arose. Then you can examine, but first just see it. And you say, why did this anger arise? Why does it continue to arise? And you go to the source. And Zen, we call this still and know. Be still and know what arises in the mind. Then seek out the cause. And you'll see it. And through mindfulness, you'll be able to uproot that.
Thank you, Venerable. Oh, I thought you wanted to. And Gita says, I asked, I guess in regards to the Bhikkhuni rules, I asked only because we have more rules than our male counterparts. Yeah, that's why our male counterparts are so jealous that they started like creating all these tomes, all these like commentaries. If you go to certain Buddhist countries, they have like a million other, like 1,000 rules, keep up with the Joneses. So we're like, oh, okay, it's great. But yeah, anyway, that's not, the first time I saw the number of rules being more for the bhikkhunis than the bhikkhus, I had the same sort of reaction. Why is it different? Why? How unfair, etc., etc. But then, once you start actually practicing with these precepts, well, first of all, it's not a matter, so the precepts are not oppressive. This is very important to understand. Precepts are not commandments. Very important. Precepts are not arbitrary rules. Very important to understand. Precepts are training rules given out of compassion from the Buddha. So there's something extremely useful. They are gifts that as we practice them, then it creates opportunities for the mind, for us to look, understand the mind, and train the mind towards the wholesome. So that's, great that we have 311 opportunities to do that in the Bhikkhuni Vinaya, I would say.
Yeah, the precepts are supports. As I was saying earlier, they're supports to our Dhamma practice. They're not to be viewed as restrictions. They're to be viewed as opportunities.
And Suzanne says, I'm relieved that Yasoma can still cook. So these days, not really anymore, because we have lots of very kind donors and Wadana Sadhu that, they bring so much food to the monastery. And Nancy says, Venerables, what would be your top recommendation for a new person to Buddhism to read? I'm looking for your direction in the Buddha's words. Go right to the source. That is definitely, thumbs up.
Yes, but to switch it up, but to switch to a different tone. Also, Old Path, White Clouds by Thich Nhat Hanh. But with the caveat, you need to follow it up with the Pali Canon, because some of that in his imagination was made up. It's not wrong, but it's not actual history. There's some embellishments in there, some skillful embellishments, but it's not an actual history, the biography of Buddha.
Okay, thank you. And Danilo has a follow-up question for Bhante Sudaso. The advice I heard was that I shouldn't start metta with those with whom I have any sexual feelings for.
Yeah, again, the Buddha never said this. So the I understand why that advice is said, because sometimes if you're thinking about somebody that you're attracted to, then you stop doing metta and you start just fueling your lust. So of course, watch your mind. If you notice that you're doing lust bhavana instead of metta bhavana, well then stop, do something different. But you should be able to figure out that metta does not feel anything like lust. Lust is disturbing and agitating, whereas metta is peaceful. So they're not similar mind states at all. So pay attention. Make sure you're cultivating metta and not lust or something else.
And Gita says, in any one of the suttas, is the cessation of perception and feeling described? Can you please speak about this state of mind, consciousness, please?
You don't need to know. It doesn't matter. It's a state of mind that's only accessible to non-returners, arhants, and Buddhas. So when you become one of those, you can enter it and know for yourself. And before then, you don't need to know what it feels like. This is a special state of samadhi, which can only be reached by people who are fully enlightened or close to it. The rest of us, we just need to work on getting there, on purifying our mind of greed, hatred, and delusion. So you don't need to know what that state of mind is like, because it's not accessible to you now. And by the time it is accessible to you, you'll be almost enlightened anyway, so it won't matter by then.
Thank you. And I think also has a follow-up question for you, Bhante. I recently read that both the Abhidhamma and the Vinaya were composed centuries after the Buddha's death. If that's so, why should they be deemed the words of the Buddha?
I think I already answered this, didn't I? Yeah, it's basically the same as the earlier question.
All right.
Yeah.
And Nancy says, thank you for stressing harm reduction. Aya Soma, this has really helped me to move in the right direction. Sadhu, I'm very happy to hear. And Alex says, does the fifth precept allow drinking on rare family occasions in small amounts that don't lead to heedlessness? Does it allow taking hallucinogenic plant? That's very difficult to pronounce. Hallucinogenic.
What else did you say there?
Hallucinogenic plant medicine to heal trauma. I love how the mind works. So it's always like, okay, no intoxicants, but hey, can I do that? But no killing, but hey, I have this like infestation, but no stealing, but hey, corporations are evil anyway. It's cute. We just start laughing. I mean, it's cute that like we all kind of have that sort of mind that tries to see the the way out of it. Yeah, sorry to break the news. No, does not allow drinking on rare family occasions. No drinking at all. So we're trying to understand how things are. So yeah. Having intoxicants blurring the mind, creating confusion in the mind is really not advisable. Also, once you break the fifth precept, you tend to break all the other ones. So not a good idea.
However, I would point out to make a distinction between these plant medicines and alcohol, because they're not all equal. Tea and coffee are psychoactive compounds, but they don't dull the mind. They give you energy. We drink tea, we drink coffee, we use them. The University of Zurich and Yale University have been doing studies with psilocybin dealing with depression, trauma, cancer patients have been able to overcome their difficult moments with chemotherapy and facing death. And also, in particular, the University of Zurich worked with the Zen priest. He's not a monk, but a Zen priest. And Vanja Palmers, that's his name, Vanja Palmers. And they did psilocybin with meditation and a mindfulness retreat. And there's data on that. And also there's the Center for Psychedelics Research at Johns Hopkins. They're not dealing with things that dull the mind. They're plant medicine, they're psychoactive compounds. They're used in a particular setting with a particular mindset for a specific cause, not as an addiction, not for pleasure or fun, and so on. So I just want to put that out there as a distinction.
Yeah, so just to carry on that, what we're really looking at when we're talking about the fifth precept is anything which produces negligence, which weakens self-restraint, weakens wisdom, weakens mindfulness, weakens concentration, weakens discernment, and so on. So taking something for clear medical purposes, that he has clear medical benefits, if it does not weaken your mindfulness, your concentration, your wisdom, does not produce negligence, then that's okay. So, for example, I take allergy medicine. It's harmless. It doesn't reduce my spiritual qualities in any way. But if you're dealing with something which has medical benefits, but which also produces confusion or dullness or spaciness or heedlessness or negligence or something, then you need to really weigh the benefits and drawbacks and acknowledge, be honest with yourself that you are in fact taking something which would qualify as an intoxicant. Again, maybe it's not as harmful as alcohol, but it is still something that's blurring your mindfulness, reducing your wisdom, introducing confusion and negligence. And you need to ask yourself, it's really worth it. Is it really worth it? So in the case of psychedelic therapy, does it offer some potential benefits if used under very carefully restricted circumstances? Yeah, it does. There is evidence that it provides some benefit. But you need to ask yourself, is it worth the drawbacks? It does also usually cause a lot of confusion. It can produce mind states which are not clear, bright, alert, steady, wise, knowing mind states. It can put you in states which are not in line with what the Buddha talked about. So you need to ask yourself, is it worth it? Is it worth elevating some parts of your mind while damaging other parts, reducing other parts? Is it worth that kind of trade-off? So it's not so straightforward an answer. And when in doubt, don't do it. When not in doubt, probably still better not to do it, to be perfectly honest, because we're great at convincing ourselves that it's okay, whether it is okay or not. So I think it's lovely that they're doing psychedelic research. I'm not volunteering to be a test subject.
All right, thank you, Venerables. And Esteban asks, I understand monks should be grateful with what lay people give, but wouldn't it be helpful if monks teach lay people that it's better not to eat animals because it implies to kill animals? Yeah, we do that. The monastery is officially vegetarian, but we tend to encourage people to offer vegan when possible, if we're asked. This being said, I encourage you to lead by example. So when I was a lay person, instead of going to the XYZ monastery and complaining about what was there, I was actually already practicing gratitude as a lay person. And then I went to all the monasteries I went to actually were not vegetarian except for Bhavana Society. And I always brought a dish, and it never had meat in it. And everybody, whether it was monastics or lay people, were very happy to eat it. When I was a lay person and we started this organization, and I was in control of the kitchen, I was offering vegan food to pretty much everybody that was coming on retreat. I was making it in the kitchen. I think that's why Suzanne was saying, I'm glad that Ayasoma can still cook, because she used to come on retreats. So I think that was an indirect compliment, which I'll take. But yeah, actually, just by offering, the majority of people who were coming had no idea they were going to eat vegan food. And for them was like, oh, actually vegan food, I didn't even realize that it was vegan food until the end of the retreat. this tastes really good. How about I actually let go a little bit of all my obsession with meat? Was never so successful in convincing people to take wholesome habits like I was when I stopped, telling them to do things, but I actually offered something to them. So yeah, I encourage you to practice in that way. And Melinda says, I am reading a book called The Breakthrough by Ajahn. In the book, a Brahma asked the Buddha where earth, water, fire, and wind cease without a remainder. Buddha said he worded it wrong. He should have asked, where is that earth, water, fire, and wind can find out footing? Find no footing. Can the Venerable explain this for me?
I'm actually planning to give a talk on those verses one of these days because it's actually quite an interesting topic that has been debated for 2,500 years because it's actually a little bit obscure what the Buddha was talking about, and there's a lot of different opinions. But actually, one of the interesting opinions which I've come across recently, which makes a lot of sense, is that the Buddha is actually talking about the domain of infinite consciousness. Because the answer the Buddha gives is he says, consciousness which is not manifest and infinite. So he pretty much directly says, you're talking about the domain of infinite consciousness. But then he says, after that, he says, but when consciousness ceases without remainder, then that domain also ceases. So the Buddha says, well, the technical answer to your question would be the domain of infinite consciousness, but that's still within the domain of samsara. And there's something beyond even consciousness, no matter how sublime or boundless it seems to be. There's something even better than that, which is the cessation of consciousness. But again, this is, I'm trying to give a short answer to something which cannot really take a short answer. So you'll just have to wait for the full length talk on the subject.
Hi, thank you, Bante. And Kauser Friend is asking, I've had people express feelings of self-loathing and even suicidal ideation to me online. I want to help, but I find it difficult, especially since I cannot be physically there for them. Any advice, Venerable Daidang?
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier, actually, is listening. If all you can do is listen well, people appreciate that. The problem is that we don't listen well. We're waiting for a gap in between the person's statements to put in our opinion, and they can feel that. But when you just listen and not necessarily offer a solution, unless you actually feel inspired and you have a solution, you know you can say something to help them, just listen and be there. Be fully present. Make it a meditation. Then it's mutually beneficial.
I would also add to that if somebody is talking about suicide and you feel like you're not the right person to help them, which is likely, to be perfectly honest, that you should refer them to specialists. The world is full of people who work for free to help people who have suicidal thoughts. Suicide hotlines, they're pretty much always available. There's people that they can meet in person. There's people they can talk to online. There's tons of resources out there for people who have suicidal thoughts. So I would strongly recommend that you connect them with those resources. Don't try to dig through it on your own unless you really know what you're doing, because it's really easy to say the wrong thing and then the person interprets it as supporting their suicidal ideation. You don't want that. You don't want that on your karma. You don't want that on your mind. So try to help them get help from people who are professionals at dealing with suicidal ideation.
Yeah. Just don't ignore. Whatever you do, don't ignore. I lost a cousin, by the way. True story, because I wasn't fully available. Didn't even try to help at the time because of my own mental defilements and my own depression. At that time, I had my own depression. So please listen and respond, as Bante said. If you can't help, refer to psychotherapists and those hotlines, free, professional care.
Sorry about your cousin.
Yeah, it's tragic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Venerables, for your guidance. And Adine says, I no longer follow my breath during meditation. However, per Bhante Sudasa's suggestion, I focus on my whole body. Oddly, after a good while, I can no longer feel my body. Am I doing something wrong? And actually, Adine clarifies, I mean, paradoxically, I cannot feel my body anymore after focusing on it for some time during meditation.
There's actually quite a good chance that you're just spacing out. So the body can disappear under some particular circumstances. One is when reaching the formless attainments, which, to be honest, I don't think that's what's happening in your case. Would be beyond fourth jhana. Most people aren't even getting first jhana, let alone beyond the fourth. Another case where the body can disappear is when developing anicca sanya, the recognition of impermanence. That can also lead to the experience of the body disappearing. And it can also happen while doing silent illumination practice, which is a combined samadhi vipassana meditation, as I've mentioned before. But when you're just doing samadhi practice of mindfulness of the body, your body should not disappear. In fact, your body should feel extremely intensely real. So if it's disappearing, then that's probably an indication that your mindfulness is fading out, which is not so good. So make sure you're really intensely, alertly focused on paying full attention to your body sensations.
Thank you, Bhante. And Nancy asks, Venerables, did you find that the cleaner your lifestyle became, the more sensitive you became to smaller quantities of something, for example, meat, sugar, anger, noise, etc.? Well, interestingly enough, I'm smiling because I'm thinking that you're assuming that once we become monastic, our lifestyle becomes cleaner, especially in terms of sugar, which is quite the opposite of my experience. Because all of a sudden we can't control actually what we are introducing in our body. So actually it was evident prior to ordaining, actually, there was no sugar ever in my life because my mom never really had sugar. So I never actually felt the need for sugar. And so at the retreat center, there was no sugar, and the lay people would go a little bit insane. Sometimes they would sneak out at the deli during the break and purchase sugar and bring it there. But anyway, but since I had control over sort of my life, there was no sugar. And then all of a sudden, as food is being offered, I realized a lot of people use a lot of sugar while cooking. So you don't know that you're eating the sugar until your mind starts going insane because it starts craving sweets. And I never craved sweets my entire life, maybe when I was 5 years old. But now it appears. It's very interesting. Yeah, it's a sort of drug actually, because it affects your body, that then affects your mind as well. So that's why I smiled. This being said, yes, I would say definitely more sensitive in the sense of more aware, but also more equanimous. So there's both the awareness that there is noise, that there is anger, perhaps both in my mind, but also in other minds. But also more equanimous because I understand the causes and conditions that create that mind state. And also I understand the impermanence, for example, of the noise, or the impermanence of the irritation that rises in the mind in reaction to the noise. So yeah, I think I hope I answered your question. And Kauser Friend asks, is illegally downloading a movie stealing in the sense of the second precept? Anyone wants to answer that question?
I wouldn't do it. But I would let Bhante Sudasa, who's more
that's a good
linear
answer.
master.
This is an endlessly debated subject. And I don't actually know of any conclusion to the debates on this topic. You'll see people who say yes and people who say no. So you'll see monks who fall on both sides of this. But there is, I would rather ask yourself the question, do you have the capacity to pay for it? If you do have the capacity to pay for it, why aren't you? That's more what I would suggest you ask. So some people, they're actually in a position where they just can't. For one reason or another, they just can't afford it. It just isn't an option for them. And then it becomes quite a different topic. But if you're just getting it for free because you're just stingy, well, that's a completely other issue that you really need to look at and address. But I personally, I don't think it's breaking the second precept, but I do think that it can be an unwholesome action. So you need to look at your mind and see what's going on there.
All right, thank you. And Melinda says, thanks, Bante. I can't wait for your talk. Me too, actually. Very interesting.
Yes, me three.
Well, you're the one who brought the subject up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, great.
He asked about it the other day.
Great.
Yeah.
And Danilo says, I was starting metta with my girlfriend and it immediately brought a smile to my face and warm feelings, which I could direct to neutral beings and hateful beings equally. But one of my Buddhist friends is telling me that it is just affection and not metta. And they're telling me to seek out, make friends.
God, okay, whoever's giving you this advice doesn't know what they're... Oh, there's more, okay.
Yeah, and while they're an advanced practitioner, I'm a bit confused. I'm very thankful for the friends I have, but seeking male friends specifically seems very weird to me.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds to me like they're just giving you whatever advice they've heard or read before,
Right.
But I don't think it's appropriate in this case. If thinking of your girlfriend produces metta, then that's real metta. In fact, if you don't have metta for your girlfriend, that's a major problem that you need to look at. You should have metta for your girlfriend. Absolutely,
right.
Yes. So if thinking of your girlfriend brings up a genuine, pure wish for her to be happy, that's metta. And once again, I sincerely hope that's what happens when you think of your girlfriend. It's actually very ironic. During a retreat a few years ago, I was doing a meditation consultation with a young man, and we were talking about metta, and he was saying how hard it was for him to do metta. And I said, isn't there anyone in the world who, when you think of them, you want them to be happy? And to give context, his girlfriend was sitting within earshot of him, and he said, no, there is no such person. So I really respect his honesty. And also his girlfriend's equanimity, because she was unbothered by this. At least she looked unbothered by this. But at the same time, I was like, wow, there's something really wrong here.
The seventh factor of awakening.
Yeah. So usually if you actually have a proper relationship with your girlfriend, then of course you have metta for her. But you probably also have some other things. Sexual lust, for example, and that's not so great. That's not metta. It's understandable, but it's not metta. So you want to be able to piece the two apart. What is metta? What is that pure, good-hearted wish for a being to be happy, as opposed to the desire for sexual contact with a person? They're two very different things, and you probably have both for your girlfriend. So if thinking of your girlfriend helps you produce metta, that's wonderful. That's perfectly valid way to practice metta meditation. Just don't go into the lust category, as I said earlier. Okay.
Great. Thank you, Bante. And Nadine is specifying that they never experienced jhana. Just to clarify.
Yeah.
Elaine says, I'm sorry about your cousin, Venerable Diamond. I hope you have been able to make peace with the day. Thank you for your thoughts, Elaine. And that seems to be the last question. So we might have an early night tonight, unless our residents have some. Oh.
So In the vein of mindfulness of emotions or feelings, I often hear it in the sense of our own individual practice and how we can practice with it in a skillful way. Does the Buddha, more theoretically, so it's twofold, does the Buddha talk about emotional vulnerability within communities, between monastics? And then more personally, how does that apply for you all in a community practicing emotional vulnerability, if that's skillful?
What do you mean by emotion vulnerability?
Like, I'm experiencing a deep emotion such as depression or anxiety or sadness or grief from my parents' loss, my parents' death. Going to, like, being willing to express that to the community or to someone in the community and process it with another individual, to hold space and to share and to process.
Bante, can you paraphrase the question
Yes.
for the people online?
Oh, so our resident gunner is asking about emotional vulnerability, in particular being willing to share one's difficult emotions and challenging emotional states with one's fellow community members and co-practitioners in order to help get some clarity or understanding around those emotional states. Is that correct? Did I get that right? Did I miss anything?
With the caveat, how does that manifest in monastic life?
With
Right.
the added bit, how does that manifest in monastic life? Do you want to answer this? No.
No.
Well, we got
I
monastic
mean, I
consultation,
can,
so.
but I think I think it's a good question for you.
I mean, absolutely. If you're having any kind of emotional struggles or difficulties, then yeah, it is valuable to share that with your trusted community members and monastic companions, to ask for support, to ask for guidance, to ask for help. Yeah, absolutely. That is something which happens in monasteries, and in fact, if it's not happening, then that indicates there's something unhealthy with the community dynamic at place. Sometimes we have the ability to work through our issues within ourselves, and sometimes we need to get outside viewpoints and ask for support. So what you're describing sounds just like community life to me. It's not something like I don't know if I've ever heard it called emotional vulnerability. So that term is new to me. But what you're describing is totally within monastic life.
And I'll follow up. Thanks, Bante. What actually comes to mind is in the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha actually emphasizes over and over again how monastics should come together. Now, he doesn't. The reason why I was taking some time earlier is that I was trying to remember whether he phrases it in the sort of angle of that would fit with emotional vulnerability, and I don't think he actually goes precisely in detail in how monastics should gather or should come together on a regular basis, and that is basically the foundation of communal harmony. So I don't think he specifies that. But he also doesn't specify, so to speak, the content of those reunions. So he just invites, it's an encouragement to go on a regular basis, come together and discuss as a community of practitioners living together. What comes to mind that is not related to the suttas is how Thich Nhat Hanh, actually, who is a very incredible practitioner all around, but also how he has introduced a lot of different practices. He has formalized them. So the practice of deep listening, for example. So if someone has, it's formalized actually within the monastic communities of sitting down and taking the time to talk about your emotional experience with others who then there are doing the practice of just being fully present, listening to you. And here at this monastery, we also have it perhaps not that structured, but we do come from time to time, and we encourage actually discussing what is going on in our personal lives. So we've had many conversations in the past. So whenever there is both an issue within ourselves or some distress within ourselves, perhaps that is completely unrelated to what is currently happening in the community. Like the example that you gave of death, perhaps, it's death of a family member. So we're experiencing grief. Then it's an opportunity to have the monastic community be aware that is what is going on, and be of support. So to practice compassion together, anukampa, trembling together. But also if we're experiencing a difficulty within the community, so with other members of the Sangha, there might be, lots of different, basically we all get married with one another. So we have multiple, like, there's lots of different dynamics that can happen. So I think it's very healthy to instead of pretend that things are not there and that we are all fully enlightened being, to be okay with our vulnerability of being unenlightened and trying to understand how to work skillfully in accordance to Dhamma. And the Buddha, actually, there's a books over there, a collection of suttas, an anthology made by Venerable Bhikkhu Bodhi, all on the teachings of communal harmony, where the Buddha gives precise sort of instructions on how to come together as monastics. So I hope that answered your question. Great. All right, and we have a few other questions that have popped out, which is great. So Alex says, I continue to relate to the concept of past lives with open-mindedness, but it still makes no sense to me. Can you point to something in your experience other than reading the suttas that helped you accept the concept of past and future lives? Yeah, I'll take that question because it's great. Honestly, just looking at all the different rebirths that I had in this particular life, the ones that I have memory of, and also the ones that I don't have memory of. I have no memory of anything that happened to me from the day that I was supposedly born. I take that out of faith that I was born, several years ago. I don't remember that day. There is a certificate and a bunch of family members and government officials that have stamped the piece of paper. So I believe that. I take that out of faith, but I don't remember being born, and I don't remember the first couple of years being born. Then I remember being this different person so many times. If we're talking about me when I'm like 5 years old and now, radically different being, both physically, and actually also science tells us that there's hardly anything, if there is anything, that is the same in terms of cells, like actual particles of the body that are the same from when we are children. So I'm about to turn 40. I'm getting very old in a couple of months. So from when I was 4, the body that I had when I was 4 years old and the body that I have now, 2 entirely different bodies and 2 entirely different minds, 2 entirely different likes and dislikes. I used to like chocolate. I hate chocolate now, for example.
You used to like chocolate?
When I was 4. Then I ate so much of it, and I think that's why I disliked it afterwards. So yeah, for example, there are certain actions that I did, like eating a lot of chocolate, that created certain results. But even though I'm a different person these days, I'm still reaping the consequences of those actions, whether I like it or not. So my experience has always been of, sort of birth and death within this lifetime in terms of being a different being. And I have a memory of being all these different beings right now. It just seems very arbitrary that this process starts at a certain point and then ends at another arbitrary point, right? So everything, all this experience that I've had, that I have memory of, there's always a cause and consequence, cause and consequence, cause and consequence, cause and consequence. And it's like constantly happening. But then we're saying that there's no cause and no consequence, like at a certain point, like it's fixed. It's completely arbitrary, isn't it? And also, why is it only related to the so-called complete death of this body? What happens to the mind? And the thing is that I very much identify with the mind. Don't identify much with the body, as I've seen with meditation practice. So yeah, I can see how I'm hung up with the mind. That's my process of identification. If all of this disappeared right now, would it make a difference? So I'm working on not identifying with the mind, on understanding, realizing for myself that the mind is not who I am, but it's a process.
Well, on that
So this
point,
what comes to mind, and yeah.
On that point, which is you lovely explained, so you're forced to anyway. When you go to sleep, there's a little interim. There's blank nothing. Then all of a sudden, you're in a dream body, in a dream world, crazy world. And then you wake up and say, oh yeah, I was dreaming while I was there. You have this sense, and if it's a lucid dream, it can be just as vivid, more vivid than the waking state. I've only had a few lucid dreams, but so that's also a way to look at it, is every day you experience a death and a rebirth.
Yeah,
most of us feel like a bundle of thoughts, right? Are we all pretty much the same? I know for myself, mostly there's a body when I'm meditating, but when mindfulness is weak, I'm a bundle of thoughts, and they're always changing all the time.
You need to work on your mindfulness.
When I'm not being mindful.
Yeah, every moment, there's a rebirth. So it really depends on how we decide to look at it. So it's not about accepting it or believing it. It's not that at one point I'm like, oh, I'm believing this. I mean, I was raised in a very secular way. Borderline atheist, agnostic, borderline atheist. So I could never possibly believe in rebirth. It just makes no sense to believe all of a sudden in something from my mind. I just started seeing how logical the Buddhist system is. It is incredibly logical. It's illogical to think in terms of YOLO. And YOLO is not a secular concept. You only live once is deriving from Judeo-Christian religions, from Abrahamic religions. It's just that we removed the paradise and hell afterwards. But that's what you do. You only live once. And the reason why you only live once is that there is a God creator that created you. That's the sort of, working hypothesis that Christianity has. So, yeah, YOLO as a secular concept just makes no sense, to be quite frank. And once you start studying Buddhism, everything fits in. So you can start experiencing what is feasible, manageable right now. And it's no different than a map. I haven't been in every single point that the map that I was shown when I was a little kid, or the map that I Google. I haven't been to Russia ever. But I trust that Russia is there, because everywhere I went on the map that was given to me, it was like pretty accurate. It brought me to Switzerland, it brought me to the UK, it brought me to New York, it brought me to New Jersey, it brought me to Australia, wherever I've been. So then I'm like, well, it's very likely. I have a lot of faith and confidence that, if I follow these directions, I'm going to go to Russia. So it's the same with the Buddhist path. And Danilo says, I'm going to be moving to Ukraine over the summer, speaking of that part of the world, because of financial problems and being documentless, and because I'm unable to attend college in the US. Oh, sorry to hear all these issues. Well, there are plenty of problems. It will be sad that I will be able to make these talks less often, but there are 2 Adriana monasteries in the Ukrainian city I live. Great. Makes me so happy. Well, wonderful. Well, we rejoice in your good opportunities to listen to the Dhamma. However, my mother doesn't seem to believe in my ability to solve my problems and has instead resorted to personally attacking and throwing mean words at me. It doesn't give me a positive opinion of her, but I'm trying to be equanimous. It is very hard to experience her neglect and receive lots of empty promises and no real help even in this situation. Bante, how should I approach her and her actions in the future? Venerable, would you like to address this?
Because I know, coming from a dysfunctional family, what that's like. So if you can get away from your parents, your family members who are like that, of course, that's the solution. But if you can't for the time being, then bear it to the best of your ability. But then actually transform within yourself that speech and reply with something kind, something loving, something wise and compassionate. And then they'll see, as you know, the family members are the masters of pushing our buttons. They know how to pull our triggers. So when they don't work anymore, they pull the trigger up, but nothing. So stop pulling the trigger. You won't react. And then once you stop reacting in the predictable manner, then that negative speech, the pulling the trigger, will be ineffective. That's for sure. I know from experience, because my great aunt, Dolores, whom I love, she is the master of pulling triggers. Your sister, you're this, and that. Remember when you was fat? You know, like, what's that? At a family gathering, you know, people say something like, you know, regarding my sister. Remember when you were fat? It's like, why would you say that? You know?
Sounds like an Italian family gathering.
Oh, see, it's not just black folk. They have that. Remember how broke you used to be? You know. What do you want now? You want money? You calling me, so it must be something. And so you just bear in the beginning, you fight back. No, it's not. It's what is that? And then after a while, you stop pulling triggers. You know, it's like, I'm not pulling your trigger, so you can't trigger me anymore. It's not working.
Oh, good times. Thank you, Venerable. And Jan says, Venerables, I have a question about right speech. I would like to say all of the words of the Buddha are beautiful, helpful, and always amazingly practical. In right speech, the component of it being beneficial, what about the case where the person might take the words or may become angry and maybe direct this anger towards ourselves or others? For example, someone who's participating in unwholesome activities. We speak up at the appropriate time, but the person may not heed our words and may even be angered. I still feel we have to speak up sometimes. Is this correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Yes, correct.
Yeah, that was an easy question.
That's it?
Yeah.
Correct.
All right. And Venerable Vimalanyani asks, can you recommend a book to start exploring Mahayana Buddhism for someone who comes from Theravada? Is there anything that's really available for monastics without money?
Actually, if you contact any of the major Chan organizations in Taiwan, so Dharma Drum, Zhongtai Shan, and Foguang Shan, all of them will send you mountains of free books. So that'd be a great place to start. And also of the different Mahayana lineages, the Chan traditions are usually the ones that are the easiest for Theravadins to get a handle on. There's the other Mahayana traditions are a little bit more difficult to access in the beginning. Once you've got a grasp of Chan, then you can start to get a foothold in some of the other forms of Mahayana as well. Don't try to jump into Pure Land, you'll just hate it. It takes a long time for a Theravadan to come to appreciate Pure Land. I'm speaking from personal experience here. It took me about 12 years before I could tolerate Pure Land. Some of the other Mahayana schools like Huayan and Tiantai, there's elements that you can appreciate as a Theravadan, but again, Chan is usually the safest entry point. Yeah,
Yes,
so that's what
agreed.
I'd recommend.
Great, thank you.
There's a good book you can find online, hopefully, called Keys to Buddhism by the Vietnamese Zen master Thich Thanh Te.
Mm.
And I didn't bring it with me, and it's wonderful because you can see, wow, he understands the Pali tradition. He goes back and forth showing you the Mahayana suttas and the Pali suttas, and then he offers his insight. It's a wonderful book. If you can find it, highly recommend it. Keys to Buddhism, Thich Thanh Te.
I also recommend pretty much anything by Master Sheng Yen, so the Dharma Drum Master. One general piece of advice for reading Mahayana literature, remember that the word Hinayana is not talking about Theravada. This is a very important point, because if you think that Hinayana is referring to Theravada, you'll be triggered constantly when you read Mahayana books. But they're not talking about us. This becomes really clear. Actually, it really struck me a few years back. I was reading a book by Master Sheng Yen, and he gives a list of like the 10 wrong views of the Hinayana compared to the 10 right views of the Mahayana. And I was like, well, but Theravada actually disagrees with most of the 10 Hinayana views and agrees with most of the 10 Mahayana views. So clearly, Theravada is not Hinayana. Hinayana is also something that the Theravadins would reject. So important point.
Great, thank you. Venerables. And Melinda says, the Buddha is amazing. Yes, sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We totally agree.
Yeah.
Oh, good to see you, Key,
Yes.
from Australia.
Yes.
Good friend. Says, Australia is certainly here. Ah, yeah, yes, we've seen it, sadhu. And we're very happy that you are in Australia. Well, it would be great if you were in West Orange, but...
Yes, come visit. Well, when you can.
Yeah. But it's, yeah, Australia is great. And Maria says, hi everyone, can anyone in the chat quickly answer this? I came a bit late. Is this Sangha in Ukraine? No, we're in West Orange, New Jersey. And Mark says, the University of Virginia has been compiling evidence of past lives and has corroborated over 2,500 stories from children and adults for which there is no other explanation for their memories. They know things that were impossible for them to know based on the current life.
Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah,
Dr. Ian Stevenson, that's whose research. And Jim Tucker, MD, Dr. Ian Stevenson. Wonderful research, wonderful book. Life Before Life. I actually have that book on my iPad. Wonderful.
Great. And Maria asks, what is the name of the temple? Empty Cloud Monastery. So you can go emptycloud.org or buddhistinsights.org, and you can find all our information there. And Danilo says, whoops.
Oh, that's in responding to Maria. I think Maria has a question.
And Maria says, Namaskar, would you mind answering if your family supported you renouncing? I was a lay nun a few years back in Thailand and wanted to stay forever, but the guilt I felt due to no family support had me leaving after 7 months. So maybe we can all give an answer.
Yeah, my family was completely opposed, but that didn't stop me, because why would that stop me? Once you understand that Buddhism is the path to enlightenment, then nothing gets in your way. So if you want to be a monastic, first off, don't be a lay nun in Thailand. That's called voluntary self-oppression. Instead, become a bhikkhuni. So become a bhikkhuni. And it doesn't matter what your family says, because they don't understand Buddhism. If they did understand Buddhism, then they would support you being a bhikkhuni. So, my family was not in favor. I did it anyway, and I'm incredibly happy that I did it anyway. And after a few years, they came to accept it. and they didn't really have any other option. But also they came to see that it was incredibly good for me. They saw how much goodness it was bringing into my life. And that's usually how it goes. Usually if people's families are not on board in the beginning, after a few years, they come around. They see that it's a good thing.
Yeah.
Dante?
In my case, my family knows that I'm always going to do what I want to do anyway. So they're like, "Oh, so what's this endeavor now?" But my father is interested in Buddhism, and he actually is becoming mostly vegetarian now and hopefully vegan one day. So I have a positive influence on my family, but my family has been mostly hands off, which is a good thing in my case. So I didn't have the barrier of family saying, "No, you shouldn't do this," or chastising me or cutting me off. I didn't have that experience, fortunately.
Yeah, in my experience, well, my parents are secular, so the worst thing I could have done in their book was to, well, start a religious organization and then also ordain as a monastic. So they were completely opposed to it. Because as my mom likes to say, religion is stupid. But I think they're seeing, so they were opposed to it, obviously, and it took them quite some time to somewhat even understand that that was actually what was happening. But as time is going by, they are seeing that I'm becoming a better person. And even though they're not fully acceptant of what I'm currently doing, they're also not, they're getting used to it. So my dad, my parents, before I ordained, I took Bhikkhudi ordination. They were like, "Well, we can't give you a blessing, but we won't give you a curse." And I was like, "Okay, that's good enough." I was like, "It's progress." And Nancy said, "What is the tradition of Buddhism that you practice, Venerable?" So, well, we practice the teachings of the Buddha. That is the tradition we practice.
Yes, correct answer.
And Maria says, "Now I'm married and I have a kid, but I want to go back in a few years, at least for a year or more."
Yeah.
And Nirvanic Sunshine says, "I thought you had to have your parents' permission to ordain in Theravada. I've been concerned about this too."
Not necessarily. It's recommended, but it's actually not strictly a requirement for ordination. It's preferable, but if there are circumstances where you can't get your parents' permission, then exceptions are often made. And basically, if your parents are not Buddhist, then your preceptor will just be like, "Well, there's no hope for them giving permission, so we'll just skip that step." So, of course, it's nice to get your parents' permission, but it's actually not a requirement.
Also, if they live in a different country, there's actually the exception to that rule. But I think we all got
Well, if they're dead.
I did.
the permission. I mean,
well, yeah, also if they're passed away.
Yeah,
I did
passed
get
away,
my
you can't
permission. I did get my mother's permission.
I got the non-curse, which I interpreted as a permission.
Well, what my mother actually said is, she said, "You're just going to do it anyway, no matter what I say." And I was like, "Yeah, that's right." And she was like, "Well, okay, fine. You have my permission then."
Yeah. Aw. And M says, "Has any of you three read works by Dogen Zenji, like the Shobogento? And if so, how do you find his positions? Are they compatible with early Buddhism? Thank you, my brothers and sisters." Well, I have not read them, but I believe that.
I haven't, but I would like to. But ISMI shares wonderful quotes from Dogen, so I'm getting a taste of his teaching. So.
I read a fair amount of Dogen back in the day. I haven't read any in quite some time now. I keep meaning to go back and look at it again. As I recall, he's pretty much just straight up Soto Zen, which is perfectly compatible with early Buddhism. But if you have any particular concerns about certain things he says, please bring it up for discussion. Because again, it's been a long time since I've read any of Dogen's writings, so I don't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah, I've read a few things here and there, and I find them extremely compatible. Actually,
Yeah.
I mean, as I say, I'm not I'm not a big fan of the commentaries in the Theravada tradition, but I'm a big fan of the Mahayana and Tibetan tradition, which basically are my commentaries. And by that I mean that actually everything that is produced in those traditions really helps me understand better the Dhamma, so better the Pali Canon, really.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And Amaranta says, the 3 jewels are really worth trusting because my family and me have a good relation now, and they accept my religion even if they are agnostic and atheist. Sadhu, sadhu,
Great.
sadhu.
Good.
Yeah, I hope that my parents will get to that stage as well.
We're running almost out of time, so we need to move swiftly.
And
Zen answers.
yeah, Maria says, how many years have you all been ordained?
Less than 2 years for me.
This Sudasa?
12 years? Is that right? 12 years? 13 years?
Yeah.
Time
And
flies.
3 years?
Yeah, 3
Yeah,
years.
3 years now.
Yeah.
And Nadine says, rebirth, not only did I learn French very quickly, my teacher was flabbergasted, but I also experienced déjà vu big time when I was in Dijon. I've never been there, but seemed very familiar.
Yeah.
Great.
Intriguing, yes.
And M says, in Samyutta Nikaya, the Pina Sutta 2295, the Buddha compares rupa to foam. Is the external reality of matter an illusion? Then what is real? Is everything empty? I recommend Googling precisely that sutta, not Googling, putting it on our YouTube channel, and you can find a talk from Bhante Suttaso.
Good answer.
It's a great sutta and great talk. And Fishbowl asks, Bhante, can you kindly elaborate on what you mean by lay nuns being a form of voluntary self-oppression? This is a really long...
There is no short answer to that question. But briefly speaking, there are bhikkhunis, which are fully ordained female monks, like Ayasoma here. And if this is the form the Buddha created, it's the form which the Buddha created to help women attain full enlightenment, and anything else is less than ideal. So if you want me to go on and on about the problems with the Meiji situation in Thailand, well, we really don't have time for that this evening. But long story short, the Buddha created the Bhikkhuni order to give women the best conditions to attain enlightenment. So if you want to be a monastic and you're a woman, then become a Bhikkhuni. It's what the Buddha made for you. Don't settle for anything less than the best.
And Nancy says, to clarify, Theravada, Purula, and Mahayana, we practice all the Buddhist teachings. I confused are of all these just styles, and you can do them all. Well, let's say that this monastery is very committed to the early teachings of the Buddha, but we also are committed to understanding the different traditions that have evolved based on the early texts. And so we are open. So historically, actually, we're a non-sectarian organization. So we've been inviting monastics from all different traditions. Hence, our practice is not just only this is true, everything else is wrong. But yeah, there is a basis of the suttas that we refer to and go back to.
I mean, Pure Land, Mahayana, these are just things which you can see how they're natural expressions of the early Buddhist teachings. There's no contradiction there.
Great. And Maria says, it was actually the happiest 7 months of my life, living in a kuti by myself in a forest temple. I know people say there is female oppression, but in the end of the day, I was happy with my experience. And I rejoice in your practice and in your good karma of being able to practice in that form. and that it was beneficial for you. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So that's why I said that it was a long answer. I think that Bhante gives, sometimes he gives like these like short, succinct, like, comments that then need tomes of commentary. But anyway, we're at the end of our monk chat. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We will be meeting again next week, as usual, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, 8 a.m. and 7:30 p.m. New York City time. And we will also have a Sunday day-long retreat next week that we haven't put on the schedule yet. We're terrible at this. But it's going to be a day long with Tan Nisabo, a friend, monk ordained in the Thai forest tradition of Ajahn Chah, and who will be arriving at this monastery in a few days. All right, so we can end the evening with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And Esteban, just really quickly, are you doing retreats to other countries now, or will you? If we are invited to other countries, we will.
Yeah.
All right, have a great weekend.